Hello, and welcome to Voice the SASHA PoSHcast, your go to podcast for all things posh. Can you believe that it is already August and that so much of this year has gone by under the shadow of the COVID 19 pandemic? We at SASHA, like most others, are working remotely and physically distancing. We are also wondering about how much further we have to go in this situation. And speaking of things that are challenging and slow to change, our theme for this month's episode is myths versus facts when it comes to sexual harassment. And to speak on this topic, we have advocate, PoSH consultant, trainer, and SASHA team member Kanchan Paralkar Devale. This one promises to be a juicy episode, dear listeners. So let's jump right in. Over to Kanchan.
Hello everyone. So today's podcast, I will be taking you through some of the common myths and facts associated with sexual harassment at the workplace. Before I delve into the topic, a bit on why I chose to speak on this topic. As a workplace investigator, trainer and consultant on matters related to prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace, I come across many such opinions, beliefs, and misconceptions that people have around what is and what is not sexual harassment at the workplace. Also, very recently during the lockdown, I was on a call with one of my friends, and we were generally talking about our respective work. As I was speaking to my friend about my work as a PoSH consultant, my friend asked me that considering the current lockdown scenario where everybody is working from home, do you foresee any complaints of sexual harassment at the workplace coming up? Because I believe that sexual harassment has to be physical in nature. It also has to happen in the physical office premises. So do you really think that any complaints are likely to come up? I told my friend that, this is a common myth that she had. But, this conversation really got me thinking that there is a need to dispel some of the myths that are associated with sexual harassment at the workplace, and which is why I chose this topic for the podcast. So let's look at some of the common myths and what are the facts related to them. Now, sexual harassment has to be physical in nature. This is the fact is that sexual harassment, apart from being physical in nature, it can also be in the form of verbal, visual, psychological, or non-verbal in nature. While determining whether the act complained about is sexual harassment or not, what will be looked at is whether it was sexual in nature and whether it was found unwelcome to the complainant of the act. Sexual harassment has to happen in the physical workplace. Now, if we look at the definition of workplace in the Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013, it's a very wide definition, and it includes within its scope any place which has been visited by a person during or out of the course of employment. As such, even the current work from home scenario or office parties, conferences, offsites, travel that is undertaken on account of work, any instance of sexual harassment that occur at any of these would get covered within the definition of workplace. So one has to remember that workplace is any place where you are on account of your work. Now, if an act is not intentional, then it is not sexual harassment. Now, this is one of the commonly cited excuses that we see while we are investigating complaints. But the reality is that the intention of the harasser is immaterial. As long as an act is found unwelcome to the victim, it will be deemed as sexual harassment. So the intent versus the impact test will be applied in such scenarios. The next commonly observed myth is that the complainant did not outrightly reject the advances, did not object to the behavior, so it is not sexual harassment. A lot of times it is observed that there is a fear of rejection or the humiliation and shame societal implications, there could be a power relationship, which is why the complainant fears speaking up or objecting to the act. So the fact is that just because the complainant was silent for a long time does not indicate acceptance of the behavior. Another common myth is that the act or behavior should have been directed towards an individual. However, the fact is that sexual harassment can also happen in groups. Another common myth is that only such complaints where the complainant is an employee can be taken cognizance of. Now, again, if we look at the Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013, it does not make employment a determining factor for bringing about a complaint of sexual harassment. The complainant can be any person, irrespective of the employment status, which means it can be, while it can be an employee, it can also be a person who is on contract roles, who is a probationer, who is an intern, or it can simply be any visitor to the respective workplace who has faced an instance of sexual harassment. What is important is that the person against whom the complaint has been filed, that is a respondent, has been an employee or is an employee of that respective organization as on the date on which such instance took place or as on the date of reporting such complaint. Another myth that is commonly seen is that the complainant and respondent had a past consensual relationship, and so the act that is complained about cannot be considered as sexual harassment. The fact is that just because two persons were in a consensual relationship in the past, it does not negate occurrence of sexual harassment in the present. And also, just because a particular act or behavior was found acceptable by a person in the past does not indicate continual acceptance of that behavior. Sexual harassment must have occurred repeatedly over a period of time. Now, this is again not true. The fact is that even a single instance of sexual harassment can be taken cognizance of. What will be looked upon in such instances is what is the nature of the act, what is the impact that it has had on the victim of sexual harassment.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the video that Kanchan presented about some of the common myths that surround the area of sexual harassment at the workplace. I am your host, Shweta. I have Kanchan with me on this call, and we will discuss some of the common misconceptions and beliefs that we have seen in our experience when it comes to sexual harassment and consent violations, especially in relation to the workplace. So, Kanchan, we asked Team SASHA to provide us some of the common myths and misconceptions that they have heard. So, what is your perspective on these myths? Number one, if a woman harasses a woman, or if a man harasses a man, so basically the same sex, how can that be sexual harassment if they are not gay? So a lot of people believe that if it's not somebody who is gay, then it's not harassment if it's the same sex. What do you think about that?
See, at the end of the day, it is sexual harassment, whether it is between people of the same gender or whether it is amongst people of a different gender. Now, one is if we look at the PoSH Act per se, and if you look at the definition of sexual harassment, it nowhere mentions that sexual harassment has to occur between people of opposite gender. So the sexual harassment definition per se is a very inclusive definition, and it can include any one of the unwelcome acts or behavior. It could be direct or it could be by implication. As long as it is unwelcome to the victim, it would still be constituted as sexual harassment, irrespective of the fact that whether it is between people of the same gender or people of the opposite gender.
Okay. Okay. Well, this is something that I feel a lot of people believe, and we run into it a lot. Women especially, and it's very gendered. Women behave in a suggestive manner or dress in a suggestive manner. That means that they invite incidents of sexual harassment onto themselves. What do you have to say about that?
This, I would say, is, partly due to the stereotype traditional view that, women are the troublemakers. It is their dressing, it is their way of being, is what I mean. But to me personally, it's just an excuse that the harassers, find for themselves. Several studies have found that, victims of sexual harassment vary in physical appearance, the type of dress, age, behavior, etc. So, and every person, just like be it a man or women, they are free to dress, act, behave the way they wish, and that just does not justify that somebody has the right to harass them or indulge in that kind of a behavior.
Yeah, yeah. Which also brings me to the next question, that there is a widespread belief that no actually means yes, or you just have to ask again if it is a no until it is a yes, and which actually leads to a lot of incidents. What do you have to say about this myth?
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, this is again a myth, but yeah, I mean, even I've seen during inquiries that a lot of times this is a kind of excuse that is cited, and I would say, it's just the harasser's way to justify their sexual aggression and basically justify their one-sided sexual advances. But a no actually means a no is what people need to realize.
A lot of people believe that men do not face sexual harassment. Um, it is only women who do. Uh, what do you have to say? What's your perspective on that myth?
Well, this is not true. So, in fact, there was a survey which was conducted by the Indian National Bar Association (INBA) on sexual harassment at the workplace in India. Now, the results of this survey actually indicated that the ratio of sexual harassment against women, while it indicated that sexual harassment is more rampant against women as compared to men, but statistics did reveal that, out of the pool of men who were interviewed, almost 22% of the men said that they have faced sexual harassment. So it is not just women, but it is also men.
Yeah, and also this also does not take into account the different gender identities there are. It's a very
Yes.
binary way of viewing it. Well, a lot of managers, now this is something I've personally also heard. A lot of managers and employers have this stand that it's better to avoid, if I do not hire women in my team, it I would it's I'm likely to avoid all the trouble and the sexual harassment that can come in, and so that stops them from hiring women in their team, or recruiting women in their organization, which is a very vicious catch-22, I feel. What do you have to say about that?
No, one is definitely sexual harassment is not gender based. Now, the purpose with which the PoSH Act was enacted was to create a safe and enabling working environment for women and give them parity. So I don't at all, agree with this approach that a lot of, men have, that it is better to hire men so that there will be no sexual harassment. So one has to remember that sexual harassment is not a gender based thing. It is also not that it has to happen between people of opposite gender, right? So be it a man or a woman would make no difference.
I think it also ties in closely to the fact of to the myth that people believe that they see complainants as troublemakers.
Yeah.
So it's trouble for the organization if a complainant comes forward, rather than seeing it as a good thing that people are feeling safe enough to speak up about incidents like this. What would you say? I mean, there is, on the heels of all these strong beliefs, one of the strongest discussions that I have seen is around this sentence that all complaints are false complaints, or most complaints are false complaints. How do you think we can go about addressing this? Because this is also on the heels of the act being for women only. So a lot of male employees, especially when I conduct sessions, do say this. And then they ask about, what about male employees who have been falsely accused? So what do you think about this myth that, most complaints are false?
See, this is a totally wrong belief that exists, that all, first of all most complaints. I don't deny that there may be some complaints which may be false, but not all. And I would say to ensure that no such false complaints are filed, the Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace Act also makes a provision for punishing complainants who are filing false complaints. So I think that is one of the very good mechanisms that the law itself has created. So when an IC conducts an inquiry and comes to a conclusion that a complaint was false or frivolous, the IC can then recommend punishment as per the statute to such complainant who has filed a false complaint.
There are certain behaviors that people tend to show only when there are two people in the room, and so there is often no evidence or witnesses for us to cross verify in the committee, for example. um, and a lot of people believe that there needs to be strong proof before I can file a complaint or before I can approach the committee. And hence, a lot of complainants might not be filing a complaint because they feel like, I don't have proof. How do I prove this? How do you think we can address this myth?
So, in situations like this, it is a circumstantial evidence that is strongly relied upon by the internal committee. So, in one of the cases that we were investigating, it was a senior who had harassed a junior employee. There was a case of sexual harassment that was filed by a junior employee, saying that when we were in a meeting, it was just two of us late in the office after almost the office was empty. He tried to behave inappropriately with me. So of course the office was empty and there were no direct, there were no witnesses at that point in time. So when this complaint was investigated, what was also observed was that there was previously a similar kind of complaint which was filed against the same manager, or a general, the pulse of the floor was also taken, some of the other circumstances that existed, looking at the power equation. So all of these factors are then were taken into account. Also basis the facts and whatever limited circumstantial evidence that has been available, the IC then it is their responsibility to determine what is the probability of a certain instance of sexual harassment occurring or not occurring. Right. So these are the two parameters that are relied upon, where there are no eyewitnesses or there is no evidence to verify a complaint of sexual harassment.
So the burden of proof definitely does not only rest with the complainant, and they do not
No.
have to hesitate to file a complaint if they don't
Yeah,
have
one
any
should
proof.
not, because it is up to the IC. Then the IC will conduct a thorough investigation. It will give both parties sufficient opportunity to present their case.
What do you think in general? There are so many myths, around, and I think because of the stigma also, there is, people don't talk about it. But what do you think can be done to sort of start mitigating the effect of these myths?
I would say it's all about awareness, awareness, and awareness. Awareness is the key to bring forth the facts and demystify the myths that are there around sexual harassment.
Okay, so one of the last questions, and also one of the questions that I'm most curious about in talking to you, although this has been great too, is have you faced either yourself or have seen or heard about some myth in relation to sexual harassment, or sexual harassment at the workplace? And if so, how did you, respond to it? What did you feel, and how did it impact you?
Yeah, certainly. So, I have come across behaviors. So I've witnessed these. So the once what I had seen was that there was one of the seniors at the workplace. Very often, when the office was kind of empty and there weren't too many people around, he would go around and tap on one of my colleagues' desk. He would expect her to look at her and give her a smile, and then generally pass some comments or compliment her. And that behavior, initially she ignored, thinking that it will stop at some point in time, it will stop. But then later on it got aggravated. And she happened to talk to me about this, that this is something that I have come across. But of course I don't have any evidence, because when he does all of this, nobody is around in my bay. So how do I even get witnesses? Or it's just a compliment, so I don't know if my complaint will even be taken cognizance of. And then I suggested to her that there is an internal committee. Why don't you first discuss with your internal committee and tell them that this is something that you have come across, and you intend to file a complaint, but you are unsure whether it would amount to, because at that point in time I was also very new to this subject, and I was also very junior level employee at that time in that organization. So, she went up to the IC, discussed with them, and they gave her the confidence that, or explained to her that yes, whatever she was complaining about would still constitute sexual harassment, and if she's desirous of, she can file a complaint of sexual harassment. And she actually went about filing a complaint. It was investigated, and that person, and when she filed a complaint, it was realized that there were a lot of other people with whom he had indulged in similar kind of behavior. So they also came forward, and necessary action was taken by the internal committee against this
Okay.
employee.
That is so good. I like the positive, the way the outcome of this particular incident, and kudos to the fact that you encouraged your coworker, because that is something. Sometimes that is all one needs, just an encouragement that go ahead, because it can feel like I'm alone in all this. A person who is facing such kind of behavior. I love that you hit upon this. Your coworker said, it might be a compliment. Uh, Maybe it's just a compliment, and I am seeing this in a wrong way. That reminded me that three of the most common things that women especially believe, and that stops them from complaining, is number one, maybe it was a compliment and I should take it as a compliment.
Compliment.
Number two, maybe it's a joke, and everybody else was laughing. Especially if other people laugh, there is this doubt that I
Mm.
didn't laugh, I found maybe something's wrong with me. And number three is, maybe it is my fault, I led the person on in some way, or I didn't wear a dupatta on that day, or I accepted the lift, or I added this person on Facebook. And they don't talk about it because it comes with a lot of shame and guilt, because the onus is on myself to protect myself, right?
Right.
So yeah, this is a great example of how all of these myths can just silence us. um, and as you said, I think awareness is the awareness, and awareness, as you said, is the way to
Awareness,
go
awareness.
forward. Yeah, thank you so much for this discussion. This has been very enlightening. Would you like to say something in closing, if anything?
I would just like to reiterate the point that to every person who has faced or who is facing sexual harassment, that do not stop, or do not think that, oh, how do I go about, should I even file? First, learn to say no when certain behavior is unacceptable. learn to say no to that behavior, and also don't stop from complaining if you find the behavior unwelcome, because if you don't take that step, today it may be you, tomorrow it may be somebody else. So this is with respect to, people who are facing harassment. But even otherwise, I would say for co-workers, I think they should stand as a strong moral support, and rather than belittling somebody or making fun of, they should rather give the kind of encouragement or emotional support that a person needs, when he or she is faced with sexual harassment. So that will go a long way in ensuring that we create a safe and healthy working environment for all, not just for women, but for persons of all gender, I would say.
And that was our episode. How did you like it? What questions do you have? What myths have you seen floating around? Do write to us at voice@sashaindia.com with your questions and feedback. We would love to hear from you. This is your host signing off until we meet again next month with a brand new theme and a brand new episode of Voice, the SASHA PoSHcast. Until then, take care, stay healthy, and remember, to prevent and protect is to progress.